notion of sacrifice for the utilitarian, right? And specifically what he talks about, specifically in his discussion on sacrifice, Mill realizes that there could be an objector who states that, listen, the utilitarian ethic is flawed because of the martyr, right? What about the concept of the martyr, the individual who sacrifices his or her own life for the greater good, right? For the greater cause. And Mill needs to address that. So he talks quite a bit about martyrdom and the role of martyrdom and trying to account for martyrdom within utilitarian ethic. I'm not necessarily interested in a research basis to do any analysis on this, but there's very little that I've read out there. So those of you that are interested in research, and those of you probably graduate students that might like a topic to write about, I think it would be interesting to write about the concept of martyrdom using a utilitarian ethic in analyzing some of the problems that we face in the 21st century, right? Because obviously martyrdom is, depending on what side you're from, either something which is to be praised or the greatest threat to civilization, right? How do you confront the individual that has no regard for his or her life, and they're motivated to act for some higher cause or for some higher purpose? It's hard to address that, right? It's a difficult concept to arrive at, and that's why I'm, to be honest, with utilitarianism, you have to be impressed with Mill's account, because his account is still relevant, right? This account that I'm about to go to into sacrifice is still a very, very relevant account. Okay, so this is Mill on martyrdom and sacrifice. So Mill on Alright, this is Mill and martyrdom. Alright, so Mill recognizes that he has to address the possibility of doing without happiness. He has to recognize the possibility of lacking, the deprivation of of happiness. And he uses the example of the martyr. So how are we going to incorporate the martyr into our analysis, this huge sacrifice, into the idea of utilitarianism? Alright, so the first thing that he states is that the martyr sacrifices, and this is pretty obvious, the martyr sacrifices his personal happiness for the happiness of the community. So that the martyr sacrifices his personal happiness, right? He sacrifices his personal happiness for the happiness of the community, right? So the martyr is willing to forego, right? The martyr is willing to forego his own personal happiness, right? So he's willing to deprive his personal happiness to the point of zero. He's willing to deprive his personal happiness to zero, right? Bottom it out, with the hope, if I relinquish my sort of happiness, my desire for happiness, my desire to be happy, my desire to live a happy life, if I do that, then, so you can see that this is a conditional, then what will I be able to do? Well, I might be able to make the lot of my people, my group, my community increase their happiness, right? So this becomes a sort of conditional. The disregard for my own happiness is done in such a manner as to increase the happiness of other. And obviously this is done sort of the means, the vehicle in which this is done is sacrifice. Right? Sacrifice becomes the means in which I attain this end, right? The end is happiness. So that conforms to the utilitarian ethic, but the end isn't my own happiness. I've actually destroyed my happiness. I've lost everything that I've had in order to maximize the happiness of others through this act of sacrifice. Very powerful argument. Mill recognizes that this could potentially be a threat to his utilitarian ethic, and he needs to address it. So the question is, how does he go about addressing this? Well, the first thing that he states is that sacrifice is always done for some end, right? There's always some end that sacrifice is done for, which is what I just drew, right? Sacrifice is always, you can see that general term, right? It's always done for some end. Sacrifice is always done for some end. There's some end in sight. The reason why I'm sacrificing, the possibility of going out and making money with a corporate job and reading and studying and going to classes is because I want to get a better job and make more money, possibly, right? So you sacrifice what's immediate for this long-term consumption. And there's no difference in the concept of martyrdom, right? It follows the same logic. The next point is that the motivation is to prevent others from having to make a similar sacrifice. This is what's important, right? In the purest conception of martyrdom, the whole point of becoming a martyr, in the example that we said, is to prevent others from having to make a similar sacrifice. Right? The whole point of becoming a martyr, according to John Stuart Mill, is to prevent others from having to make a similar sacrifice. I recognize that I am going to give up any possibility to attain happiness. Obviously, I'll be dead. And that inability to attain happiness is not something that I want to convey. It's not something that I'm trying to replicate. According to Mill, if I become a martyr only for the sake of increasing more martyrs, that's just wrong, right? The whole point of becoming a martyr is that you sacrifice yourself so that your children won't have to do it, so that your nephews, your countrymen, your fellow men won't have to do it. You think that the action is so strong of an act that it will eventually send a message and others won't have to do the same action, right? So the whole point of being a martyr is to prevent others from having to be martyrs as well, right? I'm going to sacrifice myself so that you won't have to sacrifice yourself. That's the concept according to Mill. It is not the concept according to Mill, and nor does he address it, that because I think he, and this could be maybe a little point of critique, is that he doesn't incorporate or assume the concept of martyrdom, which is done for the sake of increasing further martyrdom, right? According to Mill, and it would be anachronistic in some sense to talk about how martyrdom has changed throughout the centuries. His account of martyrdom is sort of this traditionalist stance, which states that the martyr does this huge sacrifice so that others won't have to make similar sacrifices. I mean, he does not address the idea of a martyr sacrificing him or herself as a means of motivating others to follow in his or her path, right? That becomes a different account of martyrdom. Mill says that this proof of what men can do, but what they should do. So what does this say? How do I make sense of this? We recognize that individual moral agents have an ability to take your own life, right? So the first thing we can say is that there is always an ability there's always an ability to take your own life. This is barring people who don't have the physical, that are physically limited from taking their own life. This can go on to a discussion on Jack Kevorkian and so on and so forth, where with assisted suicide. I'm not getting into that. With respect to Mill, what Mill is saying, just generally assuming, there's always this ability for you to take your life. If you have the will, if you have the desire, you can take your own life, right? The martyr can take his own life. So what he's saying is we need to see the difference between this. Any ethical account doesn't talk about what you can do, and that's what he says here, right? It's not a discussion on what you can do, right? Ethics isn't a descriptive account. Ethics is prescriptive, right? I'll just put that. Ethics is not descriptive. It is prescriptive. Ethics tells you what you should do, right? So